Hey, well, we'd like to welcome everyone here today. Would remind you that these are recorded and they also appear on the BYU Library Family History Center YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com, you can find these for close to 1,000 of these videos. Well, we're going to talk about some steps to improving your photography for family history. And you can see I've chosen some of the very good examples of the things that can go wrong with the photograph as we go along here. And you'll notice down in the corner, there's a little icon. This one happens to have a frowny face. And the reason why that has a frowny face is because the photo can't be fixed digitally. In other words, you can digitize this photo, the original photo, for instance, and that will get you a frowny face if it can't be fixed. And if you can fix it digitally, in other words, if it's something that I can tell you, yes, if you use a photo editing program, and we're going to refer probably frequently to the grandparent of all photo editing programs, which has already turned into an actual term, and that's Photoshop. It's Adobe Photoshop. And to Photoshop an image has now become a common term, meaning to change or edit a photo. So you can watch for these little icons, and that will tell you immediately if you see a photo on this presentation of whether it could be fixed or not. The ones that are missing with icons are photos that are just there for just being illustrations in the presentation. So, kind of to understand some real basics here. First of all, photographic film does not have pixels. That's something that it's a little bit difficult once you get this far into the computer revolution, if you will, to understand that there's photograph is a photograph. Each photograph is a one-up artifact. It is a printed piece of material, whether it's a really old, like a tintype or a daguerreotype, or if it's newer, like celluloid film, or on paper, some kind of a paper substrate, or anything else where it's printed is not broken down into little dots, which is the way that all digital computer images are recorded. And this is sort of a blow up of what it looks like. Those are crystals. They're silver halide crystals, generally speaking, because they're the light sensitive crystals. There's other chemicals that work also. And so as the more you blow up a photograph, you just simply lose detail until it's just a blurry thing. There's no way you can see without a microscope that you can actually see this little dots of information that are what record the image. So basically, once to get into this process of doing something with a photo, you have to realize how and what you're working with here. Now, here's a fairly high quality photo, and some of you may recognize this. It's kind of a hard one. This would be a hard one to identify unless you'd we're very familiar with Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and this is Amsterdam. But so when you blow this up, if you keep making it larger and larger and larger, what you're going to get eventually is it starts to break down. And those are the little pixels that are coming. If I continued to magnify this, eventually I would see individual little squares that created this image. And it's just the fact that your eye can't resolve down to that fine detail. So it generalizes, and you get a photograph that looks like it's a continuous color from place to place, but it is actually broken down into little tiny dots. This is a digital photo of with pixels, and they were taken at 21 megapixels. That's 21 million pixels in the little area that the camera takes the picture. This is kind of a rough number. It doesn't really mean much. You really don't need to know all about the mechanics of it. All you need to know is the higher the number, the smaller the dots, and the lower the number, the larger the dots. So if you have a 2 megapixel picture, you blow it up very far, which means if you've just doubled it in size, you'd see all the pixels. If you have a 60 megapixel picture, it would take quite a bit of magnification before you saw the difference. The only really value of the megapixels is detail. So if you're interested in fine detail in a photo, then there's always this urge to go to a higher megapixel camera. Use something that has more and more and more detail. The new iPhone cameras, for example, came out with 48 megapixel cameras. So that's double what this picture, more than double what this picture was taken at. And when you go back to the actual picture, you could see that that's a lot of detail there. So basically, then the real thing that happens is that the higher the megapixel count is, the larger the print you could do. So if you're looking to print a wall mural, for example, and you want it to have reasonable amount of detail, then you've got to go to as high a count as you can afford to do. And if you want to do just simply photograph 4x6 photographs or 8x11 photographs, you might get by with far less megapixels. And when we're talking about editing the images and using a program like Photoshop, what we're doing is we're actually changing the pixels. We're creating new pixels, or even in some instance replacing them with something else. And so there's ways to do that now that are very remarkable. You may have heard of generative images made by computers. If you haven't seen that process, it appears to be magic. But it's incredible now what we can do with photographs. So here's the question. Of course, this photograph has a frowny face, and I need to start explaining the frowny face, but you need to digitize the photo before you can edit the image. Okay, so if you have a pile of photos like this, it would be probably a good idea to get an idea of what can and can't be done before you start trying to digitize all this, because you can digitize this as much as you want. This photo happens to have two very difficult kinds of things to correct. The first one is the cast. What you're seeing there is a photo that has changed color. In this case, it's gone to a yellow color as a result of chemical changes in the emulsion on the film, that the original film. And when it was printed with chemicals onto a piece of paper, and those chemicals have changed. If this were a 35 millimeter slide, you'd get this same kind of color cast on some types of film. After about 10 to 20 years, they start all looking blue or yellow or green or whatever predominant chemical they used in the particular manufacture of the film that was made. The question about that, the film cast, by the way, this yellow cast, to some extent can be corrected. But what can't be corrected in this photo is that it's blurry. It's not blurry to the point, if you happen to know this person, that you could recognize who it was, but it's not a good picture. It's a very poor picture, and it's unfortunate. The blurriness is caused by camera movement. In other words, the person who was taking the picture moved the camera while the picture was being exposed, and so it's blurred. Or the subject moved. But if the subject had moved, he would be blurred. But in here, everything, the piano, the chair, everything are blurred. And so that was definitely camera movement. There is absolutely nothing yet in the world. Now, there's talk out there of being able to reconstruct. But what is basic about this is that when you click off a photo, you have captured a certain amount of information, if you think of it in terms of what's there on the photo. And when you have the changes or the problems that are created by a photo such as this one, you have lost information. So you've lost the detail of this individual's face, the shirt, the pants, everything in this photo. So the reason why this is such a problem is because that particular amount of information cannot be recaptured. It simply isn't possible to do that. It may be able to extrapolate and make it look sharper or appear to be taking away all of the blurriness. But in fact, what it's doing is substituting sort of arbitrary pixels. They're putting in information that did not come with the original photo. So that's the real challenge of a bunch of old photos like this. And just kind of a side note, I don't, there's no going to be a test at the end of this class. So it's just something you might want to put into your head. And that is that in practice, if you're using resolution for scanning 35 millimeter film, and you can kind of extrapolate this to any photo up to about a 8.5 by 11 or whatever standard page size, that 22 megapixels will very well print a very fine-grained image of that if you're digitizing all of those films. So if you're doing just a stack of photos, if you've got something that is going to duplicate the photo in at least 22 megapixels, that's fine. Now that translates into all sorts of different technical things when you start working with scanners, when you're scanning information. So there's there's all sorts of ranges up to 2400 and 4800, 60 something, 1000 and resolution. And the only thing that's going to do is make your file size much larger. And if you want to copy them at that, it will take longer. So there's an optimal out there that needs to be looked at. So the bottom line of what we're talking about here is that you can't correct information that's not in the original photograph. If it was lost when the photograph was taken, or it was not recorded properly, as with a blurry image, then you've lost that image. You've lost that information. It's just not there, no matter how much it is. But I mentioned before we even came on that if you have a photo, this is the only photo, for example, if we have of this person that we've never seen this person, and this is their only photo, you certainly do not want to throw it away. Even if it's looks blurry or whatever, if it's a unique artifact, meaning it's the only information you have, then you certainly do not want to destroy it. So these are the kinds of images that we're trying to avoid. And I've given you 3 out of 4 that I did with frowny faces that actually can't be corrected. There's nothing we can do with this photo that will correct the photo. Okay, so the first one, we'll start in the upper left, the one that's got the pine trees and the people at the picnic table. What's wrong with this photo? Well, it looks like they're pretty clear, so there wasn't a lot of camera movement. Exposure looks nice. I mean, it could have been a little bit brighter, but it was probably cloudy or partly cloudy day, and this was where there was a cloud. Well, what's wrong with this picture? There's virtually no one in this picture that could be identified. Some of the people have their backs to the photographer. Several of them are wearing sunglasses. The rest are side views or partially obscured views. Unless you were there and actually participating in this, it would be almost impossible to sit down and figure out accurately who these people were. So this photo, although it's technically it's in the lower not so okay but okay photo, it is not a good photograph. It is totally unacceptable, and from the standpoint of someone like me who is sorting through photos, this one definitely goes and gets deleted. It's not worth keeping. I can't get anything from it it's really going to help anybody. The second photo over here, that's going up in the upper right-hand corner, that's the people standing out on a field. This is probably close to the same place that the other picture was taken. Same problem here. It's fairly good resolution. It's a little bit overexposed. In other words, It has the colors that are washed out. And I'll probably repeat that a number of times, but overexposure is in a sense the most difficult thing to recreate. That actually means that where it's washed out, the detail, that the detail's no longer there. It just cannot be, you can't do anything. You can make it darker. And in some cases, the detail may be there, but not have been printed properly. And then that's the case, then you may be able to recover some of the detail from an overexposed picture. But it's really in the category of a photo that can't be identified. Now, if you happen to know these people, and it was an important thing to remember them in this particular image, then you would want to keep it. And you'd want to be sure and identify who the people were. But and the other problem is that if you don't know these people, if this is just a stack of photos from your relatives or your parents or whoever, your grandparents, and you have no idea who the people are, unless this was something that could be considered to be of historical value, then it would be, this would not be a photo that I would keep, for example. The same thing when you get down to the lower right there. It may be like, and we may fall in the category of being the only picture we have of this person. I would seriously doubt that that's the case. But it's a nice picture of the wallpaper, but the image, the person in the forefront and in the foreground of this photo is clearly out of focus and very hard. The fourth photo there on the left at the bottom has a smiley face. The reason it has a smiley face is because it's underexposed. And an underexposed image can obviously, it can be fixed. You can lighten that up, and the product of that, of editing that photo, would be a very acceptable photo. So when you're looking at overexposed, bad, underexposed, fairly good, perhaps. It's going to look a lot better than trying to fix an overexposed image. Okay, so let's look at a good photo, first of all. We're going to have to start with something that is excellent. This was done by a professional photographer. It happened to be my great-great-grandfather, and my great-grandmother, who were both professional photographers. And this is my great-great-grandmother, Margaret Jarvis. And this is an excellent picture. Everything about this picture is good. The way it was taken, the detail, the exposure, the way that the person is presented in the photo, everything about this is very excellent. The clothes, the hair, everything is beautiful. This is about as good as you're going to find in any kind of photo from the past. This is what you would call a gold medal type of photo. So now we're going to get into the 10 quick steps about how this all works. So here's the first step. The first step is, if you're going to take pictures, and this is actually for helping people who are in the process of recording their family history. In other words, taking photos at parties, at gatherings, at weddings, at whatever it is that you're involved with. First of all, you need to know your camera. You need to know what you're dealing with. A large percentage of photos today are being taken with smartphones for any number of the different Android or Apple phones that are out there. But there's very few people that know how to take the pictures properly with their phone. And it would be, if you're really interested in preserving and having good photos, then you need to learn how to use either or both of these items. There's going to be questions, argues about, well, you can't get the same quality with a camera, with a smartphone, that you can with a dedicated camera, like the 35 millimeter DSL camera. Anyway, so we're going to get this camera, and you're going to use this as your primary camera. The question you're going to have is, if you want to be blunt about it, is the camera on the right, if it's the smartphone, is probably superior to any camera that you didn't buy within the last couple of years. the technology of the smartphone cameras is basically what you're looking for. And they are, right now, like I mentioned, the iPhones are up to 48 megapixels, some of the other brands of cameras. And there's a constant background in the area of photography discussing which cameras are the better and comparing cameras back and forth. So if you get into YouTube and look up the kind of camera you're interested in, you'll find videos comparing it to practically every other camera in the market. And basically, there's always one or two or three that are everybody agrees are the best cameras. They also might be the most, or probably are the most expensive ones. But for the kinds of pictures that most of us are taking for memory purposes, they're probably overkill by now. And discussions back and forth about the quality of smartphones as opposed to standalone cameras. All I know is that many of the professional photographers today are abandoning their $6,000 or $7,000 cameras to use a smartphone because they're able to get just about the same quality of pictures. It's an interesting time to live if you're involved in photography. So what do you do? How do you learn? Well, watch videos, take a class, or read a manual. Read about how to take good pictures. Learn to use your equipment. Learn to use the kinds of photographic equipment and organizational things that come with your computer. If you're using a phone, learn how to store your images on your phone and edit your images on your phone. I've probably got 10 different programs on my phone that will edit images and do a really good job. And so basically, it's a process of learning. Here's the issue, and I hope I repeat this more than once, but if it's worth preserving the memory, it's worth learning enough about the way you preserve that memory to do a good job. And I guess the statement that came down from my grandparents is that any job worth doing is worth doing right or correct. And so if it's worth taking the pictures and spending the time to take the pictures, you certainly need to take the time to learn how to do it properly. This is number two. Number two is learn how to hold the camera steadily, or if you're like me and your hands shake, use a tripod. Use some kind of a mechanism. The simplest ways to do this is to, if you don't have a tripod handy, is to use the wall or a doorway or an article of furniture, something to brace your camera against to keep it from moving while the picture is being taken. If you don't have any of that, then you need to learn how to stop your shaking for just that few tenths of a second or a second that you're taking the photograph. That gets harder for me as I get older, but for long years I learned how to do that, and so many of the pictures I have done with what are called handheld shots. But it's not happening so lately now, and I've been learning how to haul around my tripod more frequently than I used to. And I have now a lot of different ones, and I've just got one for doing scanning. So here's a lot of different kinds of tripods, or camera steadying devices. The one I just got is like the one in the lower right-hand corner that will allow me to hold my smartphone at a flat angle so I can take photos, use it as a scanner. Now that it's up to 48 megapixels, its quality is as high as a flatbed scanner in most cases. And so it's, especially for the speed and ease of use and the time that it takes to take the pictures. So these are kind of illustrative of the types of mechanisms for holding the camera steady. No, by no means is this an exhaustive picture, because there's just really a very large number of different kinds of devices out there. Even though, and this is the reality, This photo is definitely overexposed, and it's also got a color cast to it, a blue color cast. So what you have here is a photo that's totally useless. Even the people who are up in the front, the emulsion has, if you look carefully at the two figures in the background there, there's sort of a blob off to the side of the one figure. That's where the emulsion on the photograph or on the original print from the slide or from the negative had degenerated already. So there's almost nothing you can do. I could change the color cast, but I can't change the fact that this is an overexposed image. And the fact that there's no way to identify any of the people in the photo and not even the place unless you happen to know exactly where this place is. And that's not always the case when you inherit photos from your family. Then that's just not going to be a photo that's worth keeping. But even though most of these cameras, and especially the smartphones, can correct for light conditions and they can correct for color and they can do all that, you get almost perfect images every time you take the picture. If you're doing that and you're taking this in really bright sunlight, it's still going to possibly be washed out. And especially if you're pointing into the sun, you may not get anything in your photo at all. So just to emphasize, overexposure, like this photo, can't be corrected or edited out by a photo editing program because the overexposure actually destroys the image in the area where it's overexposed. Now, this photo is interesting because it's both overexposed and underexposed. So the picture of the people down below they're in the shade, so you really can't see them. It would have been nicer if they'd been up on the steps there, if it was possible. It doesn't look like it because, well, there's some way you can get up because there's people up there. But it would have been nice if they'd been up on the steps or ability to get up there, or if they'd moved closer so we could see who they were, or just about anything else that would be helpful with this photo would have been good. So this one is still in that overexposure category. This is number 4, and this says there are multiple things that go into each photograph that you take. In this case, there's first of all, we'll go back to focus. Now, if you see like that one photo that had the person in the foreground that was blurred and the background was in focus, the wallpaper back in the background was in focus. That was a focus issue. They didn't focus the camera correctly. They didn't focus on the subject. They focused on the background. This is a blurred photo. This is a photo that was not in focus, first of all, because the whole image is blurred, but it's also moved because there's kind of like outlines about everything. And that comes from what the camera movement. The third thing is that the light conditions here were very poor. And so it would necessarily have to have a longer exposure, even on a smartphone, which have all this electronics to make it almost light in the daytime. Had the person taking this picture had a smartphone instead of a regular camera in the time period of this picture was taken, there were no smartphones. Then it would probably be a much higher percentage of possibility that the photo would not have been blurred and would have been visible. But here we have a problem. We have almost the top of the head cut off, the arm is cut off on the corner. If the person is the object of this photo, then that person is not being put in a position where they're the best position in the whole photo. And if the rest of it's supposed to be the object of the photo, we have no idea what it is or where it is. And so you're wasting your effort to go around and take pictures if this is what's coming out of your production. You need to start learning a whole lot more about how your camera works and how you maintain and look at photos. Probably one of the and you're going to learn it from seeing what you've seen here already. You probably can guess that movement of the subject or movement of the camera is likely the most common thing that makes a photo become either unrecognizable or not worth spending time doing any kind of reconstruction. Now, as artificial intelligence gets more, let's call it sophisticated and more complex than it already is, where it already is very, very complex and very sophisticated, you could probably take a picture like this and recreate the whole picture, but that would not be the picture of these people in this wagon on this event. So understanding that once you get into this realm of reconstructing the picture, it no longer has any relationship to the original. It's not an original picture of what happened. It's a generative image of the subject matter here. And how do we know about the blurriness on this, that it was movement of the people? Well, first of all, this was completely out of focus to start with. But in addition, the people moved, as you could see here. So this is definitely a picture that was not possible. And the movement was not dramatic. They were going fairly slowly, but the camera speed was still so slow that it did not stop the action of the wagon or anything else. So there's kind of a combination of things here that needed to be correct. So how would I have solved this picture? Well, first of all, if the person had had a tripod and if the person had used a light meter, which measures the amount of light, and set the exposures properly and set the exposure to take advantage of the fastest speed for taking the photo was concerned, then all of that could have been corrected at the time and had a perfect photo of this wagon. So now we're getting into, I mentioned this slightly in one of the previous ones, and that is the composition of the photo. So if you want to have good composition, it's something that you immediately look at that and you say, that's a good photo. And you sometimes don't know why that's a good photo. Well, one way to learn why there's a good photo is to study photography a little bit, learn a little bit about it. And one of the design functions of both painting and photography in the realistic sense, and even in the abstract, all of these principles work with even abstract paintings and all sorts of things. But if you start to learn a little bit of fundamentals about what makes a good painting and what makes a good composition for a photograph, and why you think this photograph is better than another photograph, it comes down to mathematics. And the mathematics involved here is called a Fibonacci spiral. And it's the natural curve of the way that your eye looks at an image. So as you're looking at this image, it starts there on the left and it pulls you down to the bottom, and then you curve around and you end up looking at the windmill there. And the reason why the windmill is where it is because this painting was done intentionally to put that windmill on that spot in the painting. You could have moved it to the right, to the left, you could have gone down or up. All of that was based on what was the most important item in the image, and that was the windmill. And so this is the way that it's composed. And if you think in terms of this curve, or it's also called the rule of thirds. If you think in terms of the rule of thirds, then you're going to start moving your camera to the right or to the left or to the up or down until you have the person or the item or whatever it is on that 1/3 line. And if you look at the overlay here, here's the thirds. So you have a third of the photo on the left, in the middle, and then you have on the right. And you can put that person on that line, that vertical line, in the right or into the left. But then you have a balanced photo that everyone will, whether they consciously realize it or not, will recognize it as a better photo than if the person were standing in the middle, or if they were clear off to one corner or up and down or wherever. As long as the main point of your image is either on the right or left hand third mark, you're going to have something that will be comfortable. It will be something that you say, oh, that's a nice picture of your grandmother. Oh, that's a nice picture. Now, what about single images of an individual? Well, there are ways to do that, and I'll show you a few ways to do that in just a minute here. But let's go to another photo. Okay, so this is a large group of people. This happens to be my family, the Overson family, and my great great grandfather. And my grandmother is in this picture. And so this is, and I think one of the little kids in the front is my father, although they're not identified and they all look kind of the same. But basically, this is a recognizable photo for our family. Now, what does that have to do with the subject of the thirds? Let's put a little overlay here and show you the third for this picture. Not exactly 1/3. You could say, oh, it could be a little bit over. But you notice this was a professional photographer and the seated person is on the third. Now, you could say, well, that's just kind of a coincidence that the guy happened to be sitting there. No, this group of people was arranged by the photographer. And that person was not put in the middle, as you would expect most people to do. They were put right over on the corner where they would be most noticed in the photo because of the rule of thirds. So this is kind of a fundamental issue with taking photos. And you get to the point, believe me, after taking a few 100,000 photos, that I can look at any view and automatically my eyes associate it with 1/3 of how to do the thirds, because I realize that all the photos that are good have this same quality. Here's the next one. The next one is, if you're going to do a subject, then zoom in on the subject. Okay, you can see in this picture, this is a nice photograph. The quality of the photograph is excellent. It can be easily edited by one of the programs to come out to be even much nicer. And so here's what would happen if I edited this photo. Now there's more detail and there's closer view of the twins. But to save yourself having to go in and do an editing on every one of your photos, if you think in terms of the way that the photo looks when you're taking the photo, instead of you're taking just casual snapshots of people and from here to there and whatever. But in this case, when you're thinking of taking a formal photo with someone and their self, make sure you focus in on that. We don't really need a lot of the background that's totally blurred out anyway. But if we have a good, sharp, excellent photo in the foreground, then let's have it cropped in and looked at a little more closely. And here's, I guess I would call this the ultimate in both of these photos that I've got here. As a genealogist, I just shudder when I see this kind of photo. This is the kind of the epitome of the scrapbooks, and I'm not using the term derogatory. I'm just saying that this is what people do. But from a genealogical, historical standpoint, we've destroyed a lot of information in these pictures. Now, we may be able to identify the statue from doing a Google search, and we could possibly recognize the person down in the corner. But you can do this all you want if you do it, but please don't do it to the original photo. So here the rule is that any alterations should not be what are called destructive editing. Destructive editing removes information from the original photo, the information that may be necessary to date, to identify, or to even recognize what the photo is, the subject of the photo. And so this belongs in the area of scrapbooking, but it does not belong in the area of genealogy and the reproduction of the photos. This number 8 is check your equipment. Now, what's wrong with this photo? It looks like it's just overexposed. The problem is that it is overexposed, but it's overexposed in a way that is not due to the overexposure of the settings of the camera. This is called a light leak. In other words, in an old camera, either there was a hole in the camera, or the flap on the back of the camera holding the film was not seated properly, or some other defect in the camera. But this information came from a camera itself being defective. So this is a primary example of a defective photograph. There's no way in the world that any of the information in this camera, in this photo, is useful. And unless it's part of a sequence and it's absolutely essential to some kind of story that's being happened or whatever, this photo was ruined by the fact that the person was using a defective piece of equipment. At one point in my endless succession of cameras over the years, from the time I was a teenager until the present, and how many different cameras I've owned, one of them was remarkable in the fact that it had a defect. It was a digital camera that had a defect in the sensor, which is the part of the camera that takes the picture. And it put dots all over the film. And before I realized that was happening and looked at them, I had taken quite a few pictures. Fortunately, those are things that can be fixed, and they can be removed without destroying the subject matter of the picture. But I still have a large number of those photographs around that were digitized, and now I can see all of the dots all over the picture that was caused by the defective sensor. Now, this particular picture is something that also kind of falls into that category. The one thing that happened here is that it may not be obvious, but the camera is tilted. It's not level. And so what we have here is, it looks like this happens to be, by the way, Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena, California, and this is the Rose Bowl Parade, just for your reference. And Pasadena Avenue is flat as a board, and there's no hill. Can I fix this picture? The answer is, even if I tried to fix it, which is what I did here, I'm not sure that the color still came out good. I tried a whole bunch of different combinations of color, but I did fix the fact that the horizon was now flat, and that the image didn't look like it was running downhill. And this is a very cloudy, smoggy day in Pasadena, and it was probably about as good a color and as good a photograph as you're going to get of one of the random floats in the Rose Bowl Parade. So I would still mark this as unacceptable, even though I made some changes to it. And it was the kind of things where I would start thinking in my mind, this photo isn't worth keeping. And yet, unless there was something about the photo, or something that was a direct memory that would be something that I could add in the way of using this as an illustration or something, because otherwise, this does not show anybody from the standpoint of a genealogical standpoint that would be identifiable or have any reference point. Number 9, look at a lot of photographs. Go through all the photographs and then put them into piles, or put them on your computer, or digitize them all and put them into folders, or however you want to sort them, into bad and good. And the criteria here, the basic criteria is anything in the photo recognizable? In other words, does it actually have an image that's recognizable, that's useful? If not, throw it away. If it's random pictures of vacation things, pictures of sightseeing places, there's plenty of photos out there that we can use that are very high quality for almost every spot on the face of the earth. So it doesn't really add, unless you're doing a story and you put in the photos for the background, or to reemphasize the story. That's another judgment call on the part of the preservationist, is whether or not that's something that should be accurately done. And then think about what makes it a good photo and what makes it a bad photo. Now, this is a portrait photo. The quality is not as good as some of the previous ones we've had. But this is a photo of one of my great-grandmothers who does not have a lot of photos. And so this one is irreplaceable. And there's something about the photo that's very good about it. And that is that the person is not staring straight at the camera. They're not smiling. They're not having an unnatural pose like it was a posed photo. This is more of a picture of someone that you would see if they were sitting there talking to you. And for me, has tremendously more emotion and relevance to learning about my ancestors than any number of staged photos. And this is actually a photo taken by a professional photographer, my great-grandmother, the other great-grandmother who was a professional photographer. They all knew each other. So here's the group photo. Now, what characterizes this photo? Although it is completely posed, nobody has their eyes closed, even though this took longer than a few seconds to take this photo on the cameras of the day. It's a little bit casual in the sense that they're not all in the same place. They're not all looking in the same direction. They're not all individually. And it actually shows you some character and gets into the life of these people. And you can see a little bit of their character and their interests and how they look at the world. And so this is kind of another priceless photo, something that absolutely you should keep and recommend. The reason I would keep this photo is because I can identify one of my great uncles here, the tallest one there with the hair that goes kind of straight up in front. So this is an important photo. It's also taken by my great grandmother, and you can tell that she had an eye for getting interesting photos. Okay, so here's some kind of quick examples of how the photo is set up. This photo is an actual photo. This isn't a generated photo. This is a photo of a lotus flower, and it happens to be located outside in the Lotus Garden, which is just off the Beltway up in Washington, D.C. And it has a painter quality because it's a little bit overexposed, but it looks more like painting than it does like a photograph. And the lotus flower is dead on the left third of this photo. So from a structure and standpoint, this is a very interesting photo. You could say, well, it could have been better. The answer is if the realism in the act and the image had been sharper, maybe that wouldn't have been quite as effective. So there's a lot of concerns about this. Okay, so now let's look at this photo. Is this a photograph or is this a generated image? I'm going to show you the next one. I'll come back. So which of these two is a photograph and which is a generated image? Okay, I'll let you think about it here for a second. Here's the one image. And here's another image. You could put these both into categories of standard rugged coastline pictures, depending on which particular area that you were in. Okay, well, you had a moment to think. How many of you thought that this photo was generated? And then let's go to the second one. How many thought that this photo was generated? Or that neither were generated and they both were photographs? Or that they were both generated? Well, the answer is this first one is a photograph taken up in Canada. The second one is totally fabricated. This is a generated photo. Okay, so now you can see that we're moving into a completely different realm of photography, if you want to call it image making, and where the image making can be to the point where there's no real difference between reality and the image, the actual image. And that this is totally created from a prompt, from typing a description of the prompt. So how would I be able to tell almost immediately that this was a generated image? If you look back into the back of the background of the image and you look at the hills back there and look at the very edge of the hills by the clouds, you'll see a white line that runs over the top of the hill. That tells me that this is a digital image. But the rest of it would be hard to tell. So this was generated by an AI program. So now we're back to these kinds of images. This is another. This one could be better. There's some movement. Person who is my great grandmother is on the right, has apparently moved. Her mother, who's in the middle, who's my great great grandmother, did not move. So the image of her is quite sharp, but the other ones are not. Regardless of the fact that somebody moved and it's blurry, this photograph is priceless. This is the last one, and that good memories take time and thought. If you're going to make a photo that's going to be memorable and that people will enjoy for ages, then you need to spend some time composing and making sure that the information that you're gathering is adequately kept. Now, that might mean that as a photographer, you're moving very rapidly and you're taking lots of photos and hoping that some of them come out to be good photos. Or it may mean that as you're a professional and you make somebody sit in a certain way and make sure that they're looking properly at the camera and that you get the image that you want to get out of the image. By the way, this was not a color image. This is a colorized image, and it was colorized by the myheritage.com colorization process. And so it's a very remarkable example of what a colorization will do to enhance an image. And now this is sort of the counter to that, and that is you don't always have to be staring at the camera and smiling to have a good image. These are images of my grandmother, who I never knew, and who was the one in the wedding photo. And these are very precious photos because they show kind of the character and how this person was living. And so these are just incredibly important photos. It is worth a memory. It's worth the effort to get it right. So thanks for watching.